We're back.
So I was looking around because I'm trying to find a booster seat or something. They keep putting me.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing?
Good.
Great.
Well, welcome to the Kavod Family Podcast. We've got Travis Shook, Casey Wilson, Danny Antoine, Justin Bohner. So, Kavod Family, if you don't know, this podcast is just one of the resources that we're creating. And our heartbeat, man, we are so convinced that God is laboring so hard to restore family. First and foremost, his family. The outgrowth and effect of that is to restore families in every community, in every place, in every town, in every city. And that good families make up a good community. And when you've got a good community, man, that's a place everyone wants to live, right?
Powerful.
And so we just want to be the salt of the earth. We want to be the light of the world. And that affects every area of life. And so we just want to provoke, encourage, champion, let you know that make family first, become a good dad, become a good mom, raise godly children, do this. And that's the primary ministry that you have in life. Everything else, it will be blessed if you do that well. And so let's jump in. Today we're going to talk about identity. We have this framework that we talk about all the time here at Kavod Family, Kavod Fitness. We talk about it all the time because it's 4 steps, 4 processes that really help you identify where you're at in life, what's the next step, and it's a cycle. It's a rinse and repeat for almost everything that you can think about when it comes to what God's called you into, right? Mm-hmm. Identity, calling, forge, reign. Travis, this hit you long ago when you were building the gym. Flesh that out for us real quick, and then we're going to dive heavy into the first one, identity there.
Yes. This is actually the beginning days of the nonprofit, before the nonprofit existed.
Okay.
I had this idea that we needed to get a group of guys together and kind of fix all the things that we're hitting on now. And I was literally sitting in my living room reading the Bible and thinking, like, there's so much in this. Like, how do I condense this in a teachable way, in a way that you can explain it kind of quickly, but also in great detail? And it was like God hit me through David's story and then quickly followed with Jesus' story of identity, calling, forge, or the forging and reigning. And I mean, if you look at David's life at the beginning, he was a shepherd. He was in the field. And that's where he figured out whose he was. I said whose, not who he was, because he understood that he was God's son there. And then from there, the prophet Samuel came and anointed him king. Yeah. So then that's his calling. And then the next, I don't know the actual time frame, but the extended part of his life, he was the musician for Saul, the armor bearer for Saul, the warlord. He was second in charge of the nation, of the whole army. Saul got jealous and wanted to kill him, and he ran. So this is all the forging process.
Yeah.
And then obviously he becomes king, and that's the reigning process. And then you kind of just rinse and repeat that. You see it with Jesus. He leaves and goes in the wilderness, and 2 of the 3 temptations that Satan has is at his identity, at who he was. And then from there he goes into his calling. John the Baptist baptizes him, and he just runs this gambit of the whole thing. And I was like, man, when you think about it, as a young man and everything, you're figuring out, who am I? Like, what do I do with my life? What's going on? And then you kind of figure out what you want to do, and you're screwing it up for the first decade. When you get married, the whole process. And then as you get older, the idea is like, we believe you know who you are in God. You understand your calling, the last thing Jesus told us to do. You're in this forging process of you know who you are. You're walking in it, but you're messing it up. You're figuring it out. And then it's not that you get it perfect, but you have an idea of who God is and what he's called you to, and you're reigning, and you're teaching others to go and do it.
Yeah. And so that framework is not just your identity as a son. It's also your identity one day as a husband. You've got to step into this, and then you're refined in that process, and then eventually you get good at it, and you become a good father, and you rule and you reign, right? It's also your identity as a father. It also fleshes itself out in the karate studio. I mean, a young one comes in. You treat white belts just like you would treat black belts, in the sense of you're teaching them the same culture, right?
Mm-hmm. It's all the same thing. I mean, I teach them, first of all, black belt's just a white belt that never quit, if you look at it from that perspective. So it gives everybody hope. There's nothing special about any one individual outside of the fact that you got the resilience in you not to quit. That's the biggest part. And most people miss that. And they miss the fact that also when you get to your black belt, that's the beginning of it. But to give everybody a sense of identity in that. I think about, there's something we always tell the karate kids at the karate school all the time, right? Know who you are and whose you are.
Yeah.
Right? Know who you are and whose you are. But you got to think, how many kids never hear that? Never, not even, just even the question of knowing whose you are, right? They hear who you are, but like, who loves you? You know what I'm saying? And when I can see it on their faces every single time, man, where you bring that to them. You can see the relief when they start realizing, no, especially my babies in there that have, no dad or sometimes no parents. It's the grandparents raising them, and for them to constantly hear me tell them, like, you're my girl, you're my boy. You know what I mean? I had a little girl yesterday. She's a little biracial little girl. And I walked by her. She was in class. And I looked in the mirror. I was like, huh. So I came up behind her and I rested my head on her shoulders. I said, look over there. I said, don't you and I look alike? And she just cheesed. I said, you're my girl for real. Like, we look alike. I said, you
That's
look
funny.
like you just came straight from me. And she's just sitting there like, But it's awesome to just, when we're thinking about identity, as men, as fathers, as husbands, it's truly one of our big jobs is to give identity and to bring that to people for them to understand truly that's who we are. And if they can first identify it in us, it is actually a lot easier to translate to them if they see how much we have our own identity intact with the Father. You can't give what you don't have.
But what's cool is there's a foundational piece. Like if you understand who God is in your life and what Jesus did for you, and you're solidified in that, like David, if you look at David's life, he was a shepherd where he figured out whose he was. He was a musician. He was an armor bearer. He was a warlord. He was a fugitive on the run while the king was trying to kill him. And then he became king. And that whole process, none of those titles or accolades, husband or anything, was, I mean, I'm not saying he got it all right, but the idea is he was God's son, bought and purchased by Jesus. Like that is the overarching theme. That is your buy-in to the table. That is that's everything. And if you understand that, you will be a good husband. You can be a good son. You can be a good wife. You can be a good coach. You could be whatever the heck you want to be. That really doesn't matter if you get the idea of who you are in him and what that means and what you do with that. Like that's life. That's it.
So if you've never listened to this podcast before, we want you to understand that our worldview, our lens on life is a biblical worldview. And in that, we believe that God created mankind to be in right relationship with him. And that was lost, okay? Paradise lost. This world becomes mad, and it becomes filled with sickness and disease and hurts and pains and suffering and all kinds of evils. It's the result of that separation and broken relationship. And that God is on a mission to restore that relationship. And the fruit of restoring that good relationship or putting that bad relationship into a good context is that life is restored back to the way it's always meant to be. Sons would become sons of God. They would walk that way. They would live that way. They would think that way. Their identity would be sealed in that. And so for us, the issue of mankind is heavily relational. It's not just cultural. It's not just experiential. It's not just, hey, if you were born poor, that's what you're going to be, and you've got to get out of that. For us, it's relational. And so the fundamental issue in life is a broken relationship that needs to be restored, which is why we see, just look at the numbers of children that are incarcerated or families that have habits of incarceration. It always comes back usually to a broken home and a father that's lacking and missing in the home. And so the sufferings that we all are going through, addictions, behaviors, everything that's going on, part of us says, hey, this is highly relational. That's the issue. It's a relational issue between us and God. And so we want to make a case today as we talk about identity that we want to restore that identity with God. And as you restore it, then good things begin to happen.
What if we start with talking about what is the danger that we see in the world apart from God?
Perfect.
What about here's something to throw out. What about self-identification? What about how the world says your truth? Look inward at yourself and then identify that way, right? identify by what you feel, right? Not objectively, as in who God tells you that you are,
Right.
but subjectively how you believe that you are. What is the danger? What is the danger in that?
Well, I just think the obvious, we live at a time right now where we probably have if you could grade this thing, there's probably a greater identity crisis than there has been in the last 100 years. And it's the fruit of looking inward at self rather than looking upward at him, right?
I'm gonna stir the pot a little bit. I'd venture to say it's not, because Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. I think it's been like this since the beginning, because there's sin in the beginning and Satan
Fair.
reigned rampant.
Fair.
And we're able to see it at a larger scale with TikTok and Instagram and everything in our face. But I think it's always been there because of the separation of God with sin.
You know, that's why Satan gets on my
cycles.
nerves. He does. He gets on my nerves, man. I mean, we live in a time right now where everything is self. Everything is about self-improvement, right? So he gets the world to stop focusing on the Father and start focusing this way. So it's a me culture all day long. So when you find your identity in just who you think you are, that's always going to be a problem. We see it all over the place.
Yeah.
To not have your identity in the Father, the one who made us, it's always leading you down a crazy path. But then we get into this culture where everything is self-improvement, right? Look at all the books that are written. Look at all the videos that are out. Everything is, it's all about me. I'm telling you, man, he did a job on the culture today in getting everyone to focus that way instead of realizing what you were actually created for that way.
That's pretty good.
But what was the I like what Travis said, because what was fundamentally Satan's accusation against Adam and Eve in the garden?
Did God?
He's withholding from you.
Yeah, exactly.
What he did was he fractured their identity, right? He separated them from saying, I am the child of a good God. And what does he do with Jesus, like you were just talking about?
You're the son
First
of man.
thing he does is the same exact thing he did with Adam and Eve. The first thing he
attacks the
tries
identity.
to do is to say, if, right? He knows he is. But he says, so if you are the Son of God, right? So that from the Genesis 3, from the third page of the Bible, what do we see? An attack on identity, fracturing that relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what we've
You know,
seen to this
what's
day.
ironic is we all know that one of God's names is I am, right? And I guarantee almost all of us, when we introduce ourselves, I am, and then we say Casey or I did this. Like God is so clever that even unbelievers, people who are complete polar opposite, I am, like
Use
there's
his name to identify
ownership
themselves.
of God in that right out of the
That's
gate.
good.
Brian came on. He told us, he says, look, you got to tell people who you are. And not one of us started with, I am a son of God. We all started naturally looking inward, right?
Yeah.
And the word identity, the Latin, the root there, it means same. It means sameness, like copy paste, like who you come from. That's what it means. So when you give an identification card, it's supposed to be pointing right back at you. It shows them, you're connected to that card. And so we are consumed in this world with same, and we're looking in the mirror or we're looking at somebody else around us. How many times have you had, we always do this. We give an analogy about a father making the assumption that it's a good father that they have. And you're like, hey, think about your dad. He takes care of you, right? And then the little kid's like, no, my dad's
I know.
He's
It's like
in jail.
nowadays,
I've never
it's like,
seen
no,
him.
not really.
Yeah.
It's like you stuck. Like, wow, really?
And so their identification is with a broken father.
Broken, yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's lost. And so this identification is what Jesus came to restore. This is what he came to rescue. This is what he came to do, that he would lead us to the Father, right?
That's how God restored me. I had a broken relationship with my biological father growing up. And I still remember having this conversation, with the Father in my office on identity, because I was reading, Day of War. And I happened to notice, like, through reading that, and I went back in the Word, like, realized, man, in the old days, you identified by not your first name. You always identified by what? Who was your father?
Son of, Ben.
So instead of saying, Benaiah, they'd say son of Jehoiada. And it's like, and I remember sitting in my office thinking, like, at the time, my relationship is broken with my own dad. And I'm like, so if you say son of Gerald, like, I feel like I don't have anything to go on there. And I'm thinking to myself, like, Lord, that's not good. And I remember the Holy Spirit speaking in my heart saying, you're wrong. Because see, when they speak of you, they'll say, Son of the Most High, Son of God. So, and it felt like an eternity of him just going through all these different names. And I'm like, you know what I mean? So you went from like being crushed to God bringing you back up like this. But that kind of brought me back to the place of when he first explained to me, I'm going to make you understand what it looks like to truly father a fatherless generation. But here's the humility part in us getting good identity. You're going to learn how to father a fatherless generation by first allowing for me to father you. Because before you can be a good father, you have to first learn how to be a good son. And the way that I love you, that love that I show you as a dad, that's the love that you're going to love the nations with. Any other love outside of that, it's not going to be a pure love because it's not going to be a love from me. But the same exact way that I love you is a way that I expect for you to love all these kids that I will bring to you. So the first thing you got to do is learn how to be a son. And in being a son, guess what he taught me how to do? Receive.
Yeah.
What do even most Christians have a hard time doing? Receiving, right? We like to do. And how many times do I hear people, well, I'm not used to asking anybody for anything. It's like, really? We were created for intimacy. We're created for relationship. That means we're also created to, at some degree, to be able to depend on each other, right? If I need something, first thing I'm doing, I'm calling my boys, man.
Yeah.
Right? But I have to come to a place of being okay with when I can put in a call, number one. But number two, it's okay for me to just relax and receive from these guys. You know, it's perfectly okay. But we don't deal that way. So understanding that it was my job to learn how to receive love before I could give love, because I cannot give what I don't have. And at that point, my view of love was very conditional. It's I love you as long as, right? You know, I say I love you because I need to hear I love you back. Never mind the fact that I'm supposed to be loved everywhere I go. It was, no, I need to be loved. So if you don't tell me I love you back, then we got a problem, right? It's like, really? You know, that's not how many times did Jesus need us to love him? He don't. He is love. But he demonstrates that to us and teaches us how to love so that our love is actually pure.
Right.
So now it's no longer based on what you can do for me. It's just purely based on the fact that I love you. Something I, tell my kids, and I tell the kids at the karate school all the time. Now, with Christ in me, I'm incapable of loving you any less. As a matter of fact, I'm only capable of loving you more. I'm only going to love you more. I don't care if I don't get to see you for 10 years. When you come back, I'm still going to love you, but I'm going to love you that much more. Why? Because that's how the Father loves me. He makes me feel like no matter what happens, I'm so incredibly loved. Like today, I feel more loved today than I've ever have before. Only the Lord has that kind of power to make somebody feel that way. Now, what happens if we now inherit that trait from our Father and the fact that he lives inside of us? That's how we get to love the world. Will the world not respond very differently to that kind of love? How many barriers will that break down for somebody who's been hurt by somebody who's always taken from them? Now they run across somebody that all they want to do is give them. And no matter how many times they spit in your face, you give. Yeah. You give. At some point, they're going to break.
But that's understanding that nothing is of more value than your identity.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people will grab a hold of identity, kind of like the parable of the sower, like, right? The word of God goes into the ground and the bird takes it, and then the vines choke it out, all that. So the idea that your identity is it's it, like that's it, because he's the prize, right? And if your identity, you understand that where that places you in relationship with him, that's the prize. Most people will step into their calling and put their calling as their identity, the value in that. So if that rises or falls, it wrecks them. If they start a business and it's great, they're happy. If it's bad, it's terrible. If the kids treat them right, like how you said, they love them or don't love them.
Right.
Everything's wishy-washy based on this. But if you understand whose you are, he's a consistent variable.
Yeah.
His love doesn't change, and it doesn't remove himself from that. So the idea of understanding that whenever you're in the forging process, you don't lose yourself because it's hard. Like, that's the point. You're dying to yourself and understanding you're here to live for him. When you reign, you don't get arrogant and think you've got it all figured out, because you might have one idea kind of semi-understanding it, but the goal is to replicate that. And you're not replicating it so other people can reign. You're replicating it so other people can know who they are, because that is the prize.
So for you, any form of identity politics has to get destroyed so that true identity can get established. If I find my value in the fact that, okay, I'm a man, or I'm a white male, or if I find my value in that I'm a CrossFit coach, or if I find my value in I'm this or that,
It's
or this or
irrelevant.
that, or this or that, it's going to sway with culture, and it's going to sway with my performance, right? When I'm doing well, or when I'm around people that love
Those are
that,
all
then I'll feel good.
I see those all as platforms to teach identity. Like, I'm a CrossFit coach. Cool. I can teach fitness. People are going to come to me for my knowledge and skill set in that. Great. I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to get you healthy and fit, but I'm also going to tell you who you are.
Yeah.
You're a commissioner. Awesome. Cool. We're doing things. I'm helping people. I'm helping the town and the county as best I can. But when I get a chance to talk to you, I'm going to tell you who you are.
Yeah.
I'm a dad. I'm telling my son and daughter every day who you are. Whenever they go to sleep every night, I said, I love you and I'm proud of you because you're my son or you're my daughter. Not because you scored the basket, or I don't care. Like, cool, let's work hard and have goals. But, like, your value is in your relationship with me.
Just think about
I
that.
heard
The
it said
rhythm
one-
you're supposed to learn as a child is that you would wake up and you would see and identify first as a son or a daughter. When you go to bed at the end of the night, who tucks you in? It's your mother or your father, right? And what are they affirming in you again at the end of the day? The fact that you are a son or a daughter. So this nature has to book in everything that we do in life.
It gives you the freedom to live and to fail. Like,
Yes.
you're not going to do, like, if David just sat in the field and didn't, he wouldn't have moved had he not known who he was. When you know who you are, you actually walk in it and you believe it. So then there's your calling, there's the forging, there's the reigning.
Yeah.
But if you don't grab a hold of who you are, this is all pointless. You could be a millionaire, great business, wonderful family, terrible family. If you don't know who you are, you're building your house on sand. It's just temporary.
I think that going back to what Danny was saying over here in John 17, at the very end, the last 3 verses, Jesus is praying on behalf of the disciples and us who have learned through them down through the centuries. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you've given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, even though the world does not know you, I know you, and these know that you've sent me. I made known to them your name, and I will continue to make it known. Here it is, that the love with which you have loved me, that the Father has loved the Son, may be in them, and I in them. I think one of the dangers with identity is that we look at everything from a purely human standpoint. So when we're looking at something like the love of God, we look at it from the human standpoint of, as I grew from infancy to teenage years, my earthly dad loved me a little bit more every day. Like I tell my wife, I love you more than I did yesterday and less than I will tomorrow, right? That's how we look in human standpoint. But God, the moment he loved you as much as he ever will, which is infinitely.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Like, God doesn't grow in his love for you because he instantly loves you as much as he can, which is infinitely. That's, if you can wrap your mind around that when you're an 18-year-old man and you become a Christian and you look at a 70-year-old man like Tom Miller and you go, there's no way God loves me as much as he loves Tom. You go, no.
Yeah.
God loves you the moment you become a believer as much as he will in 1,000 infinities.
Hey, yo, if Tom's not 70, you got problems. I'm
He's
just saying.
74, actually.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
He had a birthday
Uh-huh.
Man.
last
Yeah.
week, right?
So
But I think that helps shape when we're looking at our identity. Our identity, like you're talking about, doesn't rise or fall with our success.
Yeah.
Right? If that was the case, then
I'm screwed.
Job would not be written like it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? His identity was not in his calling, right? Because his calling got wiped out. Everything. His calling as a father, all of these things got wiped
Everything.
out. But what did he do? He sat in dust and ashes with boils all over him, knowing that God loved him.
That was enough for him. That was
When you
enough.
said that identity basically based on your success, I heard it said before, those who live by the accolades of men will always die by their criticism.
wow.
Think about that.
Mm.
Those who live by the accolades, by the compliments of man, will also die by their criticism. That means don't put your faith there, right? If we understand that truly who we are in the Father, trust me, it is more than enough. When you're enough, you're free. It's when you're not enough that you got issues.
Yeah.
But when you're more than enough, when you understand who your daddy is, truly what your identity, who you're inheriting from, you understand that you're more than enough because you're more than enough to him. That means if you're more than enough to him, you're more than enough to the world as well. If you live from that perspective, you actually get to impart that to others as well. And how many people around us are suffering because always comparing themselves, right? Never feeling like they're living up to. Why? All that's rooted in what? Other people, what other people are thinking about me all the time. Kids today with the bullying issues and all the stuff that goes on in school has everything to do with their perception of what they think everybody else is thinking about them.
Right.
What happens when it doesn't matter what everybody else thinks about them because they're comfortable in their own skin because of whose they are.
So if you guys are cool with it, real quick, I'd love to dive real quick into the story of Philemon. Real short. It's just such a profound story about identity, and it just fits.
Awesome.
Okay, just a little backstory. Philemon is a book. It's written by Paul. Paul was an evangelist, a missionary, an apostle. He's traveling around throughout the book of Acts. He ends up throughout this time in a city called Colossae. And there's a gentleman in that town he probably witnesses to. He comes to faith at some point. His name is Philemon. Okay, and so this man Philemon comes to faith. But Philemon is a slave owner. Okay, and he has a slave who becomes a refugee. His name is Onesimus, and he actually ends up running away, probably taking money and running away. You're laughing at the way I said that a little bit. I tried my best. But this dude runs away, right? Flees his slave master, runs away, hears the gospel, and bonds with Paul while he's in Rome and becomes a servant to Paul to where the point he's probably bringing him food, needs, materials, sitting at his feet, learning from him. He finds comfort by this man, Paul. Okay? And so the letter is a letter writing. Paul writes this letter to Philemon saying, hey, I want to reintroduce you to this man. You knew him as a slave, but now you're going to know him as a brother. And the language that runs through this is incredible. Just the identity of Onesimus. It says that he was useless and now he's useful. He was your bond servant, and I want you to treat him like your brother. Okay? But the way he restores this slave's identity, and I want you to get that because our culture is so wrapped up with slavery and race and hatred and all these things, right? And so here you are, imagine you're a slave, truly a slave, not like truly a slave, right? Living like that, you flee from that situation and you sit at Paul. And Paul, what is it that Paul does to place identity in this young man? And you see, like when you look at this, it's absolutely incredible the way that he speaks to this situation. Paul begins to treat him. He calls him in verse 10, this is my child. Okay, so what does Paul do? He acts like a father. He becomes a spiritual father to Onesimus in order to restore his identity.
So even Paul wrote, just a quick interject, though you have tens and thousands of teachers in the faith, you don't have very many fathers in the faith. And that's his heart right here, my son.
Yeah, so he treats this slave as a son, right? And so when he writes back to Philemon, he writes and he says, look, if he has a debt, I'll pay it. Credit it to me. I'll pay his debt. Why? He's treating him like a son. Okay? He says, this man is my heart. So take care of my heart. Treat him like my
own heart.
You know? And so here's the deal. You cannot restore identity through legislation. You cannot restore identity through government and politics and all these things. Restoration of identity is something that God does, and it demands spiritual and mature fathers and mothers in the faith to help people understand this. Someone has to step into that little person that's trapped in whatever slavery they're in. Maybe they're 5, 10, 15 years old and they've been abused and hurt and taken advantage of, or they're addicted to drugs or whatever it is. They're a slave to something. And in order to get them out of that slavery, you have to treat them like a son and begin to speak into their life. That's why this slave would sit at the gates or wherever he was and just listen to Paul and bring him food. Why? Because he was restoring identity to this young man, right? It's an incredible story of identity. So here we have in this situation, legally, Philemon doesn't become a free man. But when he goes back to Philemon, the slave master, he now becomes useful. Why? Because he's not a slave, but he's a brother. He's a brother in Christ, free from debts. And you just go like, that's what we need more of. That's how you kill race hate. That's how you kill the divide. That's how you stop this. You start seeing the unity that God does when he performs this kind of miracle. That's insane what happens in this story.
That's powerful. That's very powerful. And as you bring this up just briefly too, just everyone understands something, with all the crazy talk out there, about racism and all that, I got to say, just even as my personal opinion, I'm so sick and tired of just people trying to get everyone to be in a victim mentality all day long. Hear this and hear this good. You're not a victim. Cut it out. We talk about it like this country's like the most racist place in the world. Question, if that's the case, why is everybody trying to come here?
Right.
Why is everybody trying to come here?
Right.
It's not that racism no longer exists. You're never going to get rid of racist people. But the bottom line is we're not in the same place in this country that we were before. Furthermore, to take an identity from a slave mentality is always wrong.
Yeah.
Always wrong. I don't care who taught you and what taught you what. To take an identity from a slave mentality is beyond stupid. It doesn't make
Israel
sense.
In Exodus?
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean,
their
but
minds were still, their hearts were back in Egypt.
Exactly, because they identified as what?
As
Slaves instead of what? Free people.
Mm-hmm.
We are free, period. Period. Never let anybody give you that identity.
Guys, last thoughts. We got to wrap this up. I hope for the listeners they've caught a hold a little bit of what we mean by identity and where it's found. Travis, last thoughts. Let's just run it down the table. Identity. If you see a young person that comes into your gym, Travis, and they're here just for fitness, I know you and I know your heart's desire. It's not just to help them get healthy and fit physically. It's that their soul, their spirit would be restored to God and their identity would be found in him. I mean, that's what you're leveraging this gym for.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so just speak to that for a moment.
I mean, it's going to sound pretty blunt and emotionless, but everything here is vanity apart from him. Literally. He's the prize, and understanding that he's the prize makes it so you understand you're his son or daughter that he bought for and paid for and that he loves. So I'm gonna use whatever tool or resource that I have, whatever platform that I have, to get and gain people's attention to tell them that. And then where to go with that. What do you do with that? Once you understand what your identity is, what's calling, what's forging, what's reigning, what do you do with this life?
Deepest form of identity to me comes through love. I got interesting season right now of God bringing all these teenagers to the karate school, and I have two siblings at the karate school who just started a couple weeks ago. And yesterday, the brother started asking me about some different things he wanted to get involved in, but it led into a conversation where I'm explaining to them, I love these kids already, right? I care for them so much, but I'm explaining to them the day that I met you, my heart burst for love with you.
Wow.
But they're both looking at me like I'm suspect, like, is he serious? But it didn't take long for them to realize this crazy dude with the hair is really serious. Like, he really loves us. You know what I'm saying? But for them to understand it from that perspective, even as a stranger that you're talking to, and you can feel, it's not like they're just hearing the words. They can feel that. I can already see it sinking into them, and I can see him. He's standing there talking to me, and his whole demeanor is changing in the middle of that conversation. Why? Because of love. Identity has got to be rooted in love. When we're talking about you being the son or the daughter of the Most High, that's because he loves you so much. He loves you so much. You got the most loving dad in the world. It doesn't matter what your earthly dad did to you. That's not the standard. He's the standard. Yeah. And men, we've said it before in podcasts, as a man, as a father, you take the title of a father from the ultimate father. Wow. That's a powerful thing. The Bible tells you that. All fatherhood derives its name from the Father in heaven. So that means that's what we get to inherit. Yeah. Never let anybody speak to you and tell you you're a bad dad. If you messed up, too bad. Get back on a horse because your kids need you. You're the only one for the job. Amen. Billions of people on this planet, God chose you for them.
Amen.
Billions of people. He could have given them to anybody else, but instead, who'd he give them to? You. You know what that means? You're the only one for that job. Stop letting the world give you the wrong sense of identity and identifying you for who you are. No, they don't get to do that. Don't give them that power. He tells you who you are because you're his son, right? Ladies, you're his daughter. You're the daughter of a king. You're the son of a king. It's amazing.
There's only there are no, spiritually speaking, there are no orphans, right? Jesus says to the Pharisees, "You're sons of your father, the devil." And then there are sons of God. And if you are a son of God, that is going to bring you into direct opposition with people who are not sons of God. And that's difficult because the fear of man is real, right? But Galatians 1:10 says, if I was still afraid of man, I wouldn't be a slave of Christ, right? And right here in 1 Corinthians, though, just to comfort you, it's addressed. Paul says in verse 14 of 1 Corinthians 2, the natural person or the unbeliever does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for their folly to him. And he's not able to understand them because they're spiritually discerned. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself to be judged by no one. For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. When you recognize your identity as a son of God or a daughter of God, that's going to make you look different and act different. People are going to think you're speaking a different language when you talk about how you have enough capacity to love all these kids, how you have enough love in your heart to adopt and bring into your home 6 children, right? How you have enough love in your heart to shepherd and mentor all these people coming from all these different backgrounds, right? They're going to go, I can't figure this out. I can't figure you out, right? And they're going to resent you for that oftentimes. But ultimately what we have to see is that's not my identity either. What you claim that I am isn't my identity either, right? And understand that the Bible clearly addresses that they aren't going to know why you are filled with this love, but nevertheless, we're called to have that love for others, right? And so rest in that knowledge of the fact that you are set apart, you are different, and that will bring opposition, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, last thoughts for me, the story of Philemon is just so powerful because it takes a man who's a slave, who has no hope, nothing, no belonging, he has nothing. And by the end of that relationship, he's restored. His debts are paid. He has now friendship. He becomes a son, and he can begin to believe and dream for what life might be like ahead of him. And I just say that's on the table for every one of us. Until we get sonship and our identity secure, we're just wasting time in many ways, just wasting time trying to solve problems of business and work and money and relationships and all of these things. Everything is so central to coming back to realizing I am a son or I am a daughter of God. And when you find that identity, then you can start to build on a sure foundation. And so this is just core to us. It's real to us. It's very, very, very much present in our life. We have watched many men, many women, many husbands, fathers, children correct their life, correct their behavior because they begin to function as sons and daughters of him. And so we just know this. This is a real principle. This is what God does. He restores identity to people. And so we just throw that out there. We want to encourage you, believe in it, trust in it. Fathers, please cast this over your family. Remind them daily whether they've failed you or not, disappointed you, frustrated you, broken house rules, whatever it is, begin in that day where they understand and know that they are sons and daughters of God and they are loved by you. And so we just want to thank you for your time, man. Thank you for following. Thank you for listening. If this struck a chord with you, please send it, share it to a friend, and stick around with us. We've got far more to come. This is just the beginning. From here on, we want to begin to shape you and forge you and make you into a human being to where you're reigning as a son, reigning as a husband, reigning as a father, a business owner, and not just getting by. So stick with us.